in the middle of the chapter 24, when the Alter Rebbe points out that the person who deliberately violates Hashem's Ratzon is lower even than the Klip and Sitra Achra, because Klip and Sitra Achra, meaning to say the spirits of impurity, they have a mandate to present themselves in this specific style, in particular style, persuade the Jew to do contrary to the Ratzon Hashem, even though it's not a pretty picture that they present, not a holy picture, very distant. That's why they're called Klip and Sitra Achra. That's why they're called the spirits of impurity. But yet, they overall have a mandate to do so. And he brings a classic example from Bilam, which he was the epitome. He was the star in the world of Tumah, world of impurity, and he tells the messengers of Balak, and again, that's why they called him, to curse the Jewish people, the core of negative energy. Balak called him, pour that over, pour your energy onto the Jewish people, the negative energy which you have, in other words, the context of curse over the chas v'shalom, Rahman al-Itzlan, over the Jewish people. That's why he was summoned. But he himself, and this is what he's pointing out over here, says to the messengers of Balak, I cannot violate the mouth of God, and whatever God will tell me to say, that's what I'll have to say. And that's how it was in the end. As we pointed this out, the detail that he hated the Jewish people even more than Balak, yet he was kind of put a muzzle on his mouth in a way that Hashem orchestrated, that what Hashem had in mind to do, which is to bless the Jewish people, that came through Bilam. So the outcome, the result is fabulous, but the proof that Alter Rebbe is bringing, that even Bilam says La yuchal aver et pi Hashem, that I cannot violate, because the klipa, the spirits of impurity, they follow a pattern, they follow a particular mandate which is given to them to present themselves or to send their evil signals to persuade man or persuade the Jew to violate the Ratzon Hashem, as opposed to the Jew himself who does that. The Jew who deliberately violates the Ratzon Hashem, he never has a mandate to do so. As we pointed, this is the Nekuda, this is the point where we left off. He doesn't have a mandate to do so. Quite on the contrary, his mandate is not to do so. And therefore, when he goes ahead and violates, and he does contrary to the Ratzon Hashem, he's lower, categorically lower than Klip and Sitra Achra. Categorically lower than Klip and Sitra Achra, the forces of impurity. Now, to make it clear, as the Alter Rebbe himself made it clear, it's not, they can't give them a pretty fluffy picture of the Klip and Sitra Achra. They're just doing what Hashem wants, so they're all holy. They're very far from holy, because the fact that they presented themselves in this way shows that they are not completely infused and with the godly reality, because something which is completely filled and the godly reality is felt within them, they would definitely not be able to present themselves to persuade the Jew to do contrary to Ratzon Hashem. In the end of the day, they call Hashem Elokad Elokaya, they call Hashem God of gods, which this with Alter Rebbe proves over here that they acknowledge and recognize the reality of God, but in the end of the day, let's not forget, they still call themselves a God, because their connection to God is still some type of a unique or different type of a connection than someone who connects with God in a way that he fulfills his mandate being a holy, sanctified mandate. Someone does a mitzvah, he's davek b'HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Godliness is imbued is felt, pervades his whole entity, and everything about him is uplifted to a godly spirit and level, as opposed to the whole godliness within them is galus, it's exiled within them, which means to say the godliness is not manifest within them. It's only makif, we pointed this out last week, it's only makif, it just hovers over them. It doesn't enter into pnimiyut, and therefore they present themselves as klip and sitra achra. They are the core and the epitome of impurity. The core of and the epitome of sitra achra means to say the complete other side, the antithesis to God and godliness. But yet, the Rebbe is proving over here, the point he's making over here, true, they call themselves a God, separate from God. On the other hand, because from the perspective of godliness, there isn't anything else. You cannot not only not call yourself a god, you can't call yourself anything, because from the perspective of God and godliness, in Milvadi, there's nothing else other than Hashem, and they do call themselves a god, which shows that godliness doesn't pervade into their mitzias, into what they are and what they and into them into their entity as a force. In other words, they remain a force of klipa, they remain a force of sitra achra, which means remain a force of impurity. Yet in the same token, they call God Elokah, which means in the end of the day, God is their God, their master, and they are ultimately following a certain pattern which was given to them, as opposed to the Imkei. That's what we were holding. A Jew who deliberately, let me just stick to the words over here. Translate the words as they are. Man who violates Hashem's ratzain, Hashem's desire, ugarua upachas harbe me'ed. He is worse and less, lowlier, and much lowlier, and ma'id, which is a strong term. He's very, very much lowlier than the sitra achra in klipa, than the impure forces, which are called Avodah Zarah v'lehim acherim. They are called Avodah Zarah, which is idols. They're associated with being separate from God. That's where they're called Avodah Zarah. Elehim acherim, other gods, as we said before, that they call themselves Elokah Delekaya, call God Elokah Delekaya because they consider themselves a God, and from the perspective of God and godliness, Ein Eid Milvad, there's nothing else other than God. So they are part of the category of Elihim Acherim, Avodah Zarah, the separate alien from God, from the oneness of God. So they are very low. But the person who sins, is B'tachlis HaPirud. He's with the ultimate separation from the oneness, from the oneness and unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yeiser Mimena, more than the spirit of Klip and Sitra Achra. Uki ilu kaifer b'achdusei, as if he denies in the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yeiser Mimena, more than the Klip and Sitra Achra, Chas v'Shalom, God forbid, because they still consider God Elokah Delekaya, and they have a certain mandate and so on, as opposed to the one who violates. He's not given this mandate. Again, quite on the contrary, he's given a mandate not to sin, so he completely denies and in the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Completely, absolute denial in the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is standing there and says, do not violate, and I say, I will violate. You have a mandate not to violate. Yes, I still will violate. So I completely shun, I completely push away that the achdus, that oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Therefore, they call it Lisa Hashem Elokah Delekaya, and the person who sins completely denies in that oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okem Mishkos Beit Chaim, Shar Mem Beis. Like the Eitz Chaim writes in the 42nd gate of, as we know, the Eitz Chaim wrote his sefer with portals. Each portal had different chapters. In this 42nd portal, in the end of the 4th chapter, there is Chaim, which was the famous Chaim Vital, which was the beloved student of the Arizal, and he writes in his Sefer Shaharasha Beilam Haza, the evil which exists in this physical world, Hachumri, this mundane physical world, Ushmore Haklipis Hagasis, it's the sediments of the crass impurity or impure forces. In other words, you have for example, the wine, you have good wine, you can have bad wine, but within wine itself, at least the wine is wine. The sediments are this what falls to the bottom, and it's useless. It's something which you throw out, something which is no use. So he says that the spirit exists in this world, because this world, the evil which exists rather in this world, and he says, when he says evil in this world, is that possibility or that vulnerability that man could do 100% contrary to God's desire. That is not only associated with klipa, but it's the sediments, it's the lowest, it's something which is thrown out, it's something which has no value. Because only in this world can there be a possibility that one could clearly violate the desire of Hashem, meaning in the end of the day.
What's the parable with the sediments as far as?
He says that there's the wine, and it could be good wine, better wine, no good wine. But the sediments are something which you throw out. It's something which is not. So it says that the evil which exists in this world is the shmari, is the sediments of the most crass klippus, which means klippus. There's different levels in klippus. In other words, different levels in how a forest would stand in opposition to the oneness of God. So there's the klippus, and then there's klippus hagasis, which means the crass klippus, which is again a lowly state. But the evil which exists in this physical world, in this mundane world, is the sediments of the klippus hagasis, of these crass klippus. Why is it given such a term?
But evil, we're talking about the acts done.
So what Ra is he talking about? Oh yeah. So what evil is he talking about? He's talking about evil. The fact he's referring to, he's alluding to, that only in this world is it possible that someone can do contrary to the Ratzon Hashem, to the Hashem's desire. In anywhere else, it could be a world which is more pure, less pure, or like we know in the four worlds, you can compare a world like Atzilus, for example, which is Rube, which is Kulei Tov, everything is good, and so on. As in the world descend and evolve, there's less sanctity, less quality of the sanctity of Hashem, and so on. That's what makes it a lower world. But a world that there could be a mitzias, it could be a case that someone could clearly violate the Ratzon Hashem. It's tremendous if you think about it. It's most terrible. Conceptually, it's most terrible and most distant possible, or a scenario which is most distant. It stands with the greatest distance in the oneness of Hashem. The fact that someone could reach such a level to be completely kaifer b'achdus, completely denying the oneness of Hashem, to stand in complete opposition from the oneness of Hashem, which again in this context is the oneness of Hashem is saying do not do that, and I could say I am doing that. Not only I could say I do that, I could in speech and thought and in action I have the freedom of choice. That's the way Hashem orchestrated him, has set up everything that man has freedom of choice. But in the end, God forbid, his freedom of choice could be utilized in an action or in a speech or in a thought which is contrary to the Ratzon Hashem. So Chaim Vital says that that's why this world, the fact that it has that vulnerability or that possibility that someone could deny completely the oneness of Hashem. Again, much more than the spirit of klippus and sitra achra. So he calls it not klippus gasid, but calls it shmari, the sediments of the low, crass, and gross klippus.
So we talk about knowledgeable Jews. We're talking about people who understand that this is what God wants, and they willfully make a decision not to. We're not talking about the Church of the Jews now, who don't do anything without specifically having a goal of...
So I will just say like this. First of all, you see, in this context, Alter Rebbe is not saying somebody who knows he's a Talmud Chacham, or someone he's a Chacham, or he's knowledgeable in Torah and knows. It does. You know, in the end of the day, you don't have to have a goal. You don't have to have a goal. When a person Chas v'Shalom takes something non-kosher and puts it into his mouth, he doesn't have to sit there and say, God, I know you don't want me to put this in my mouth, but God, I'm going to do it anyway, so I'm rebelling in you and I'm denying your oneness. That doesn't mean...
Without religion, I don't...
Yeah, good. Or let's try it, we'll analyze this. But Alter Rebbe says the act of eating something, that's denial of, that's heresy.
But they don't even know that this is what...
okay, so let's explain this. First of all, we talk something about how it is be'emes, doing something contrary to Ratzon Hashem, eating something which Hashem says do not eat, or speaking something Hashem says do not speak, thinking something Hashem says do not think. That itself is complete heresy. When you think about it, you dissect this as we explain over here, because you're completely oneness, you're completely denying the oneness of Hashem, as opposed to even the Spirit, which even persuading you to do so, calls God a l'kadulakaya. I am Hashem's messenger, and I have a mandate to do what I'm doing, to persuade the person to do contrary to the Ratzon Hashem. When I do it, speak, do, speak, or think neged Ratzon Hashem without a formal statement, without a formal proclamation, just by doing it, I'm denying the oneness of Hashem in the most absolute terms possible, as he explains over here. Now you're saying that there's certain people who don't even know that this is not kosher. Now, so if you're talking about reprimanding them, punishing them, putting them into certain classification, classifying them, personifying them, it's not. Obviously, there's differences. Someone who knows and someone doesn't know. But if you're talking about their deeds, their deeds, by definition, is a denial in the oneness of Hashem. By definition, this is what it is, because it's neged Ratzon Hashem, something which Hashem says do not do it.
They have to know the Ratzon before they can deny.
It doesn't take away.
But they don't know.
Okay, so I'm asking like this: what if someone doesn't know that this is poison? He doesn't know, and he takes a spoon and eats it, right?
You can't blame him.
What, you can't blame him because he didn't know. But does it take away the fact that it's poison and it's detrimental? It doesn't take away the fact. That's what I'm saying over here. When you're dealing with somebody to reprimand somebody and say, well, or to compare someone who doesn't know anything about Torah and to someone who does know about Torah, obviously you cannot compare. Dr. Rebbe himself says it in the 30th chapter. He says you can't compare someone who knows what it's all about and someone who doesn't know what it's all about. But when I say conceptually, meaning to say it doesn't change the fact, like you say, that's poisoned and it's detrimental. Yeah. The act itself is something which is, the act by definition is, if you want to round it up or you want to give it another term, it's kfira b'achdus, it's heresy in the oneness of Hashem, by definition. So certainly, if someone doesn't know about it, so we got to teach him, and that's why we're so eager to jump and teach him to stay away, because it's like you would jump to someone who doesn't know something is poison, and he continues to eat it. The normal person would jump in and say that's no good for you. So instead of saying, "Oh, you didn't know, continue eating," the healthy person say, "Well, you want to make sure that he does not damage by it." And the same thing, because it's so by definition. And and therefore we would jump into any person and help every person to align himself with Torah and mitzvahs, because by definition, violating the Ratzon Hashem, violating the desire of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in this parak he speaks about loisaseh, to chas v'shalom, do something that Hashem says not to do, is kfira b'achdusah. By definition, it's denying the oneness of Hashem. And therefore he gives it that term, and he says v'tachlis habirur, it's the ultimate birur, which means it's the ultimate place which we have to look after, to dissect the good and dissect and find the good from the evil, because it's overwhelmingly, this world, because it has that ability that someone could do something like that. It shows that this is the world which needs, as he writes, it's such a lowly place, and therefore this is the world which needs so much attention. It's tachlis habirur. It needs the most attention to mevar, the teva v'ra, the evil from the good. V'lachein, and he writes there, kol ma'aseh elam haza koshim v'roim. All the actions of this physical world are difficult and bad, and to the extent that Hashem gavrim by, the wicked dominate. So this is also has different perspectives or different approaches to these final words that we see, that in this world the evil make it and the more dominant, and the good people not necessarily are which they should have been dominant because they're carrying the message of God, they're carrying the flag of God. Nonetheless, you see the good people are shunned. But that's the, like I say, you could translate those final words many different ways. But in this context, he says Rishaim Gavrim Bay, because this is a world that has that it has that possibility of someone to completely deny the oneness of Hashem. This is the world which this scenario can exist. So Rishaim, evil, is gavrim by, they are dominant, they take strength in this world. God forbid. V'chulu. And he goes on and he says, therefore the Razal tell us, al pasuk, on the verse Kisiste Ishtei, that a woman would go astray, she would deviate from the right way. Interesting that the pasuk uses this pasuk speaks about the famous Saita. Actually, Saita also, Saita, but still has to say Saita, that she's a woman which she's accused of violating her marriage. In other words, having her
husband suspects.
Her husband, she's accused, right? Her husband suspects that she had a relationship with another man, but there's no witness, and they would bring her to the Bezdin, and again, this is the time when the Beis Hamikdash stood, and they would give her from these waters, which Hashem's names are erased, and there's the consequence if she sinned, and if she sinned, she would see clear consequences immediately. As the Gemara deals with it, how the consequences unfold, namely, as the pasuk says, immediately she would expire. In other words, she would die, etc. And if she didn't sin, many blessed, she's allowed to go back and to live with her original husband, and on the contrary, Hashem blesses her. Whatever the whole dinim of Seita, there's a Gemara Seita, the whole tractate in Shas, in Talmud, which is Seita, which deals with all the details and the specific cases about, or the all the details associated with the woman, which is classified according to Teda, the Seita. So when Teda speaks about this Seita, about this woman, which is not particularly living a modest life, right? There's, how do you say, usually with the smoke there's fire. There's a reason that she is not acting, conducting herself in accordance with the principles of modesty. So what does the Torah say? Interesting, Torah uses a word, kisiste ishtei. So literally means she goes off, she veers off the right way. So the Chachamim pick up on that word, which is a very rare word, which is used in Torah, kisiste ishtei, so we understand what it means. But why did the Torah use something like this? So the Gemara says that this applies to all sins, all violations. That when you violate, it's because siste. What word do you see in the word? What word do we see in the word siste? We see the word sheite, shtus, foolish, folly, a. So the Gemara says that, this applies to all sins. The Gemara says a person doesn't sin, only a spirit of foolishness, a spirit of folly enters into his mind. If not, he would never sin. How could you sin? God says, don't sin. Famous expression in the Zohar, when the Zohar reads the pasuk in Vayikra, which speaks about particular sacrifice or specific sacrifices, which this type of sin constitutes. Another type of sin constitutes. So the wording of the pasuk, it says v'nefesh kisechta, the soul which will sin, and so on and so forth. Or another context, but again, it deals with a sinning soul, and the Zohar says it's like a question mark. Tavha. The Zohar says there's two ways to read the pasuk. One is a statement, v'nefesh kisechta, the soul which will sin, but the Zohar says put a question mark after that. Or the Zohar puts a question mark. The Zohar says nefesh kisechta. Could a soul ever sin? You're a soul. You're part of God. You have a mandate. You chas v'shalom, sinning would disconnect you completely from that oneness of Hashem. It's like like a child. We gave this example a few times. It's a child in an amusement park, right? And he's told, go on this ride, go on that ride. That ride you can't go on. It's too expensive. He feels bad. He'd start crying. It's still in a framework of, feeling good or feeling a bit bad. The moment the child will turn around and won't see anybody he knows, not his father, not his mother, no siblings, that's not just bad or sad. That's devastating for the child. He's interested in no rides at the time. He just wants to see somebody he knows, and it's detrimental. So this is pretty much what happens to the person who sins. He rips himself away from the oneness of Hashem, and in absolute terms, like we learn over here, complete heresy, complete disconnect from that achdus, from that oneness of Hashem. So the Zohar says, "Nefesh kisechta tavo." How could a person sin? So the Gemara says the fact that we do see a person sin is because nichnas be'achshus, a spirit of foolishness entered him. Because a healthy person with a healthy mind doesn't sin. It's a spirit of foolishness which entered into the person. That's why he sinned, and that's why the Gemara says the pasuk uses the term siste with that case of the Isha, of that Saita, that she veered off the way. Why did she veer the way? Because Sista, a spirit of shtus, a spirit of foolishness entered her mind. Similar to Ein Adam Mever Aveda, as he says, etc., which means Elimkin, which this is the following words, Elimkim Nichas Berich Shtus. So here's the Alter Rebbe is going to explain how the foolishness of this woman. And he says, even a Fila Isha Mina Efes, even a woman which is acting immodest, she's a light-minded person. For if she would not be light-minded, she would be well anchored in the correct and the just and in the appropriate. She wouldn't not veer off the way. So she's daito kala. Her mind she has a light mind. If haisa mishelas beruach tavas, she would also govern in the spirit of her temptation. Lulei ruach shtus sheba, without the spirit of foolishness. Which covers up and conceals and hides and conceals her innate love, which she inevitably or definitely has, because she's a Yid. And if she's a Yid, she has an neshama. If she has an neshama, she has an inherent love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this inherent love is a deep-rooted and deep-anchored love. It's called the Ava Mesuteres. It's a hidden love, but not only in a unvirtuous manner. In other words, something which is, when we say Mesuteres, hidden, meaning it's something which is negatively looked at, it's just hidden. No, Mesuteres means to say that it's well, deep, anchored, and it's an innate, inherent love. The only thing is, and what is the foolish, which is in her soul? The foolishness covers up and hides and conceals this love within her nefesh alikis, which within her godly soul, which this love only wants ledavka to cleave b'emunas Hashem, in the trust, in the faith, in that integrity with God, in the oneness and the unity. In other words, that Achdus Hashem, that's where the neshama wants to cleave to. The neshama the neshama never wants to leave that oneness of Hashem. We know that the average, just a moment, and they all know the average Yid would give up his life not to disconnect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Rahman al-Islam, not to renounce the oneness of Hashem. If he's placed on stake and he's placed in front of the idol, and he says, bow down, drop it, renounce the oneness of Hashem, the average Yid would give up his life not to renounce the oneness of Hashem. And in essence, here, this is really the culmination of the Alter Rebbe's build-up from this 18th chapter. In essence, we just said that what is in a sin? What is the definition of a sin? Definition of a sin is renouncing the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is what the build-up of this chapter as well. The whole idea of a sin, if you want to reclassify or classify according to the way the emes is, the truth of it's not just a particular detail that you're not complying with, you're completely denying the oneness of Hashem. Take the same woman, when they put her in front of an idol and say, bow down, she would say, no. We're going to kill you, she would say, kill me. Because an average Yid would not bow down to the idol, because that is overtly denying the oneness of Hashem, and the average Yid is Meiser Nefesh, gives up his life to not to renounce the oneness of Hashem. And in this case over here, she's ready to sin. And what is sin? Sin is renouncing the oneness of Hashem. It's doing the exact same thing. So why isn't she differentiating? The same woman, why is she differentiating between acting immodest to bowing down to an idol? There's no rational reason. You're doing the exact same thing. The only thing what's differentiating between this act and that act, is the Ruach Shtus, is the spirit of foolishness and folly, which is hacking and telling the person.
This is simply lack of full scope of the consequences of the action. That's the foolishness.
Why is it? Who's talking about consequences?
No, but
it's what the action is.
Yeah, but the reason if we understood the full significance of that act and all the spiritual consequences of what happens in the other worlds and all that, if we could see all that, then nobody would sin. But then again, nobody would have a free will.
So can I
That's
ask
why
you,
it's veiled in like that.
And if it's veiled, you see the same person when they're told to bow down to the idol. They also don't see all the consequences in the spiritual world. And there, why? Because they know that with that they're renouncing the oneness of Hashem. They know with that they're renouncing the oneness of Hashem. So that's exactly what he's saying over here. You also don't see, when the idol's in front of you, you also don't see all the consequences or everything which is transpiring in all different levels when you bow down to the idol. But you know that is complete heresy, that is complete denial, 100% denial of the oneness of Hashem, renouncing the oneness of Hashem. I'm ready to give up my life for that. So once we learn over here and we realize that every sin is categorically renouncing the oneness of Hashem. So in essence, it's exactly the same thing. What differentiates the two and says, here I'm going to allow myself to expire and to allow myself to be killed, and here I'm going ahead with this, with a loose-headed step in this direction? What is differentiating? That's a spirit of foolishness. That's what the Gemara means. It's like taking two things which are identical and saying, this is going to work. The other thing is not going to work. No, they're identical. They both work the same thing. They were made the same time with the same machinery. It's exactly the same. When you come and say this is one thing, the other thing is just a shtus. It doesn't make sense. And the same thing what he's saying over here. And this is exactly what happens when you do an Aveda.
Maybe in a different level. So
it's not in a different level. That's what I'm saying before. That's what the Alter Rebbe is telling us. If as the Alter Rebbe is dissecting what a sin is complete denying, renouncing the oneness of Hashem. It's exactly the same Avodah Zarah. Every sin is exactly the same. This is what the Rebbe built up because the Hashem, again, till this chapter. And as the Rebbe culminates in this chapter, in the end of the day, you're kaifer b'achdusa, you're denying the oneness of Hashem. So now, let's just use those words, denying the oneness of Hashem. It's tantamount. It's exactly the same as bowing down to an idol. What am I doing? I'm just doing something externally. I'm just bowing down.
That's certain things most of the Jews will not do, like bowing down to the idol.
Why? Because they know that even though it's an external act, what am I doing? I'm bowing down. I can tell Hashem, I'm just going to bow down to something external, and 2 minutes later I'm going to go back to shul and so on. But it doesn't matter 2 minutes later. One moment of overt denial of the oneness of Hashem, I'm ready to give up my life for that. Now, once we understand that exists by every single sin, so in essence, I should give up my life at every single sin. I'll just tell you one more thing. We'll finish the class in a moment, but I'll just tell you one more thing over here. That ideally or conceptually, we should have given up our life for every single sin, because of this philosophy. Or because of this explanation or this understanding what every sin is, that it's exactly, and again, it's synonymous, it's tantamount to Avodah Zarah. And therefore, the fact that we could differentiate and say this no and this yes is a ruach shtus. That is the spirit of foolishness. But later, the Alter Rebbe asks an interesting question in the end of this chapter, towards the end of this chapter. If that's the case, why are there a concept of the big three which one has to give up his life?
Yeah.
The other ones he doesn't. If someone says, put on a light of Shabbos, and I say no, I'll kill you. You have to put the light on, and really that begs the question.
Yes.
If every sin is idolatry, so Shabbos is idolatry, and eating treif is idolatry, and every aveda is idolatry. So we should have given up our life every aveda. Now, Alter Rebbe says the truth of the matter is we should. We should, and the only reason why we don't is because Gzeiras HaKosav is just kind of decree of the Torah. The Torah said for some reason God says, I have, that only these three you have to give up your life. In other words, it's the famous three. But it's just because I said it. Gzeiras HaKosav means don't put any rationale to it. It doesn't make sense, because in essence, every single sin Jew should have given up his life. Because every single sin is idolatry. Because idolatry is not just a physical act, it's renouncing the oneness of Hashem. Every sin, as we just explained, up till now, and namely in this 24th chapter, every sin is renouncing the oneness of Hashem. It's renouncing the oneness of Hashem. We should have given up our life on every single one. Why don't we? Because Hashem says, I have a personal reason. And if I wouldn't have this reason, it wouldn't be three, it would have been every single one of 365 Avedas. We have to give up our life, because every sin is idolatry. And if idolatry, I give up my life not to bow down to the idol, I should give up my life for anything else. And in this case, the Alter Rebbe even says, this foolishness is so powerful over here. The shtus, the nonsense, just doesn't make sense. It's so powerful over here to the extent that what does she have to give up? Or what do we have to give up when we have our temptations? We don't have to give up. It's not a question of death. It's a question of holding ourselves back. It's not easy, but we can never compare holding back a taiva, holding back a desire, to the pain of death. We know it. We should never know it for many, many long years. Chaim Nitzchim. We should have all eternal life as we enter the era of Mashiach. But it's known factually, that dying is very painful on every level. And holding oneself back from a taiva, from a temptation, and many times we agree, now Alter Rebbe says, I agree, it could be difficult to say no to a fiery temptation, but no comparison to the pain of death. So we have to pull back. It could be painful, but no comparison to the pain of death. And the pain of death, I would accept not to bow down to the idol. They're not telling me I will just give you 2 straps, which would be similar to the pain of pulling myself back of sin. They said I would kill you, and to kill myself, not to deny the oneness of Hashem, I'm ready to do. So this is the power of the shtus, the overwhelming presentation of this foolish spirit, which is telling the person to do the same, to bow down to the idol, but not physically bow down to the idol, but to do the same idea, bow down to the idol by sinning. And he says, what are you losing over here? You're losing the pain of pulling yourself back, not to think, not to speak, not to do that action. It's very painful, we know. But the Ruach Shtus is so powerful, he's saying that it's not even a matter of death. Even the little pain, it's not only so little, but in comparison to death, it's definitely little. And he still says, don't pull yourself back, don't pain yourself. Go ahead with the sin. And in the end, you're denying the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So for not to bow down to the idol, not only I'm ready to endure pain, a little pain, a lot of pain, I'm ready to die for it, which is excruciating pain. Dying, physical death. And in this case, it's the pain of pulling back from sin, which could be difficult, it could be painful, but no comparison to the excruciating pain of death. And yet, the shtus, and this is the profundity of the shtus, the nonsense of the Yetzer Hara, which tells the, or this ruach, the spirit, which tells the person, go ahead, do avodah zara, because that's what you're doing. You're denying the oneness of Hashem, and with that particular sin, you're denying the oneness of Hashem. You're doing the same thing as bowing down to avodah zara. And here, what do you have to do? Not death, just to hold yourself back, despite it's painful. I know there's a taiva, there's a desire to think, speak, or do any of the levels of this particular sin. I know it's painful, but a healthy mind says, no, I'm not going to bow down to an idol or deny the oneness of Hashem. It's not physically bowing down, but I'm not going to avert and deny the oneness of Hashem, renounce the oneness of Hashem, which is tantamount to bowing down to an idol, despite it's going to be hurting, despite I have a lust, despite I have a temptation. That's a healthy mind. And if it's not so, it's only because of Ruach Shtus. Have a great night. We shouldn't stop at Ruach Shtus. So we're not going to listen to that Ruach Shtus, and we're going to put things in perspective and know that for Aveda, we're going to do the maximum, not, God forbid, not to transgress an Aveda. Have a good night.